All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Great.
Does anyone want to do this for me?
Yeah.
So there's only a quiz for people in the back row. Everyone else, you're safe. My name's Dan. I believe that risk management is one of the most important things for anyone in cybersecurity to know, not only what it is, but how to do it. If you don't know this, you will not be as successful as you would be otherwise. I guarantee it. So let's start this off.
Let's get started by trying to describe computer security in a single word.
Piece of
I'll write down frustrating.
Write down
Sandwich.
Why don't you write down
slow dumpster.
Yes,
Big
ma'am.
bag.
back, pop up?
That's 3
If
words.
you say it fast, it's one word.
This is cybersecurity today, right? I say risk assessment, someone else says pen test, someone else says vulnerability scan, and they all mean the same thing. And that's a big problem. It's frustrating to the business, it's frustrating to me, and it's frustrating to you. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone where you're just not? This is a big problem. This is huge. And they're lost, right? They don't understand it, they don't believe you. So risk management helps us get over those hurdles, no matter what part of the business or cybersecurity you're operating in. I'm going to talk about this today. Some of it's going to be a little boring. I'm going to give you a 9-step process. But I'm going to talk about this in real terms, my experiences, and if you have any questions about what I'm saying or think I'm talking shit, just let me know. All right, quick. I'm with Greycastle. I think our vision statement is absolutely perfect, and I believe that this is not only a good vision statement for us and me, but a lot of folks out here. Cybersecurity needs to be relevant, practical, and effective all the time. Think about it as blue-collar security. It can't be complex. It can't be technology-driven. It has to be driven by the business. So one of the quotes that I like is, it needs to be as simple as possible without being too simple. That's really our target. Yes, courses. So for me, this is about knowing what I have and what its value is. Because this fence right here might cost more than the horses it's protecting. And that's not a good situation. We see this a lot, especially with technology. We offer solutions to solve problems that just cost way too much. When I think about it from business terms, that's a bad thing. So what I have to do is not build a $100 fence around a $10 horse. And that's really what risk management helps us do. So as people, we're very, very, very bad at doing that. Does anyone disagree? Well, that's weird. So, technology issue. Give me 1 second. All right. Horses. Here we go. So, you always think and communicate security in business terms, period. And I'm here to talk about how we do that. Did we spend too much on this fence, this firewall, this endpoint protection, this encryption, yada, yada, yada? Or do we spend the right amount for what we're protecting? Because you can absolutely secure the business to the point where the business can no longer exist. And that's a bad thing. Right? This is going to happen. We get hacked. Every business has incidents. How do we know that this issue is something that was avoidable or not, and how much time and money should we spend on avoidance? Because undoubtedly this will happen. The impact might vary greatly. So for us, determining how much time and money to spend should be directly related to what the potential impact of the business is if I do or don't do that. And letting the business decide what that's worth. Because they know what the value of their assets are, their products, their processes, their people. This is really frustrating. I apologize. It's moving on my screen, but not on that screen. One more time, guys. this is an example of risk management right here, right? I went through this 3 times and made sure it worked. It doesn't work now.
What's the real value of that to you?
Well, for me, it's not so important because I can go on and BS all day about this stuff. These slides are just for you to feel good that I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you gotta rework your incident response plan.
Yeah, I have a USB drive. Which one's the worst? But this, here's a short list of things you may have to comply with.
Yeah.
A short list. I crank this out in about 60 seconds, things I know of. I'm sure you guys know a lot more. But all of these, you know what the common thread is? They require risk management. And not just, we built a spreadsheet with yellow, red, green, but actual risk management process. So let's talk about major failure in risk management. Does anyone know how to say this?
Yeah, that,
So imagine no line, right? It's the first term. What? This is risk management. There was this huge defensive position built after World War I, right? The French said, we do not want this to happen again. And they built the most technologically advanced bunker reinforced system underground tunnels in the world. I mean, this thing had air conditioning, right? And it was built to defend against what they learned in World War I. Guess what? It failed come World War II, 20 some odd years later. So, why did it fail? Technology advanced, right? We went from having these weird little, slowly moving mechanized things thought of as tanks to having these fast-moving panzers and airplanes and all of these things that they didn't consider. So this line was built to block any entrance where they thought the existing machinery and weaponry could get through, and it wasn't updated to address with the new threat. It failed miserably, right? But this is what happens, right? People who care. We deal with the same problem. So really the question is, why should you care? Why should I care? But really it's no matter what your position or role is, whether you're the CEO, the Chief Information Security Officer, or you're a junior technical specialist, understanding and using risk to communicate with the business, to build an effective strategy is critical. It's the only way, in fact, to communicate with the business. So you have to avoid jargon and technical terms that quite honestly just make people glaze over instantly. The most important thing to know about risk, though, is if you make a bad decision or make a recommendation that turns out to be really bad, like the meshing line, is that your fault? Absolutely. If you follow a somewhat standardized risk management process the business understands, you are building a defensible position because you did not make that decision. The business made the decision with your input. No matter where you are on the spectrum, in that corporate ladder, that is gold. So you need to protect yourself. Also, this builds a defensible position for your company, right? So why do we do this? That's a big reason. Another reason, because you have to. Most of those regulations I just put up there don't say do this if you want to, you're required to do it. And if I think about what the impacts of not doing that are, it's significant. And today it's getting more significant. Monetary fines are escalating. Impacts to businesses and reputations are escalating. Also, you don't have unlimited dollars to spend, so you can't just solve every security issue, and risk management helps you avoid that. Has anyone ever done this? No. There's no way to be completely secure, ever, period. There's no way to be completely compliant, ever, period. We have to think about what is the best way to get me to the best result, and that's what risk management helps us do. If you think technology will solve all your problems, well, are people still getting hacked every day? Are organizations still having huge impacts? Absolutely. You think they have a next-gen firewall? Probably a few of them. So we need to learn to manage risk. We need to learn to manage security, but do the most important issues and gaps first. This is absolutely true. People do not make good decisions, right? So we've evolved over millennia. Technology just started, not even 100 years ago, the way we think about it today. Probably not even 50 years ago. And I'll give you a great example. I'll give you an option. You can go stand next to a few vending machines, or you can get in the pool. There's a pool over here behind the wall with sharks. You decide. Statistics tell me that I'm much more likely to get seriously hurt or killed by that vending machine than by those sharks. But you as a person will not, absolutely not, get into that pool with a shark. Anyone get into the shark pool? You you guys are definitely dead. No, but the reality is they're not going to bite you. In fact, they're scared of you, right? But our brains evolved over a long time. We did not evolve with technology. It's going to take a long time for us to be able to manage that risk effectively, and quite honestly, I don't think we'll ever be able to do it because of the complexity of it, the rate at which it's growing, and our inability to compute. If I see a bear and it's angry, it's pretty easy. I run away, right? When I go on the internet, how many bears do you think there are? There's a lot. And you're not going to run away. In fact, you're going to jump right in. So we are not good at making decisions around risk, especially in relation to technology and complex business environments. No one person here has all the information or ability to do that, so we need a process. Yes, right. So you should ask everyone you work with, because this is an option. Do you want to be compliant, or do you want to be secure? Because they're not the same thing. The first thing a lot of people say is, wait, they're not the same thing and I have an option? That's scary. What do you mean? But this is the point. And risk management helps us make the right decisions to decide how compliant we want to be and how secure we want to be. How much money are you going to spend on one or the other, and how much time and effort? Okay, so what happens when we fail? So HIP is a good example of why, because they publicly shame, basically, everybody. But it's very valuable because they share all of the breach reporting that they do, and they give really valuable information. Well, 3 of the 4 resolutions that I just pulled up recently, here's what happened. They didn't do effective risk assessment. Guess what? From a compliance perspective, that's a big no-no. Why? Because that's the first thing you're supposed to do. If you have an issue and the auditors come in, they say, oh, show us your top risk items, and then show us what you did to fix that. If you go, I don't really know what you're talking about, you're done. You're cooked. If you don't do these things, not only is it bad for compliance, but it's bad for your program. So one thing I will say is that in the process of actually being compliant, a lot of these compliance regs understand that risk management is one of the most important things. So they're not going to tell you what to do and how to do it specifically for your business and your environment, but they are going to tell you to look at the controls, the general controls that they've published, and what? Analyze that in reference to your business and decide which are the most important to you. Okay. Anything to add? No. I get pretty worked up about this stuff because I see a lot of businesses wasting a lot of time and money. It's our job to prevent that. So risk management. So let's really get dry and define this per NIST. It is the total process of identifying, controlling, and mitigating information system related, it's a key term, risks. So everyone knows what to do now, right? Okay. So this isn't the only standard. There's others. There's ISO 27005 and other risk management methodologies that all pretty much do the same thing. They have some different perspectives, some different options for us, but they generally work. And they all do this, 3 things. First thing we do is evaluate our business against those controls. That short list I gave you earlier. Then we say, all right, of all the gaps that we have, what are the most impactful to my business? What is going to cause me the most harm? Not what is the coolest technology. Certainly I like technology. But maybe the most significant control gap or risk that I have is that, you know what? I don't have an incident response plan. So make one. Or maybe it's, you know what, our access control process on our customer database doesn't give us the ability to limit customer access from other records if they know how to get there. That could be the top risk. The point is, what I do to resolve those are vastly different, and I can communicate to the business really clearly. They would understand what I just said. They might ask some questions, but once I know what those gaps are, and what the top gaps are, I can now fix them. Of course, that's not easy either, but we'll work through that. So don't build a $100 fence from $10 floors. How do I do this? There's 3 things I care about in cybersecurity. A lot of people ignore 2 of these, which is dangerous. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. CIA triad. I'd like to talk about this a little bit because a lot of people think cybersecurity is just confidentiality, right? Traditionally, been breached, what does that mean? Data's lost. That's confidentiality. I didn't maintain the confidentiality of my customer data, my client data, my own data, whatever it is, or any data that's regulated under any of those standards. Recently, luckily, you can debate that, but Availability has become front and center. Does anyone know what brought availability front and center? Ransomware. It doesn't really affect your confidentiality. It just says, you no longer have access to your data. Sorry. Is that a cybersecurity issue? Yeah, right? And integrity, good example. Let's say you go to the emergency room, bumped your head or got bit by a shark, whatever, and they pulled your medical record and it's all wrong. That's an integrity issue. How impactful is that if you get the wrong medication or they amputate the wrong arm? Right? That's a big deal. These three factors are significant to businesses as well, because quite honestly, if your information systems have zero availability, you're out of business. How that happened doesn't really matter, but that's the key factor in how I determine risk. Okay, balancing those is the hard part, right? And we have to have some sort of process to get our brains out of shark, bear, vending machine land and into business. So, the good news is that you can never have no risk. And I'm sure everyone's heard this. The second you open a business, you have risk. You will always have risk. The key is having an acceptable level of risk. Now, how many businesses do you think are truly comfortable with their level of risk in cybersecurity? Do you think they understand it? I don't think so. I don't think we have given those stakeholders, the board, senior managers, the visibility they need to truly do that. And they're not sure how to ask for it either. So even if you do a really good risk assessment, you've evaluated all the controls, and you've done some mitigation, there will always be risk. And one option in the risk management process is to accept risk. In fact, you have to accept the right level. Okay. And obviously, no matter how much time and money you spend, there's always risk. So, who wants to how many times have I said risk now? 100. Does anyone want to define what it actually is and what risk management is? It's hard, but it's the potential. It's not what happened, it's the potential of exposure, loss, or corruption of something or anything of value. Pretty good, right? Risk management, then, is an intentional interaction with that uncertainty. So we're going to put our thinking caps on and say, all right, all the things that could happen, now let's try to prevent those. Or at least do some things that reduce what? The likelihood and impact of that occurring. And by the way, it applies to all aspects of the business, people, process, and technology. Beware of the curse of knowledge. This is something that I talk about a lot, especially with people on my team, certainly with folks that we work with at various businesses. The curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias that you all have. You know too much. And when you try to communicate to people that don't know as much as you, guess what? They don't get it. And you know when this is happening, when you find yourself repeating the same darn thing 3, 4, or 5 times, and you still feel like they didn't get it. That's your fault, not theirs. You have to be aware of this, and you have to find a way to talk in what? Common terms. Risk management helps us do that. But risk management can also be greatly thrown off track if you're not aware of this. So risk management 101, the good news, you do not have to invent this process. It exists. And there are standards that you can reference. Now, if you do invent your own process, and you have a breach, and you're a covered entity under HIPAA or some other regulation, and the auditors come in and say, well, tell us about your risk management process. You're like, well, we just kind of Googled some stuff and made it up. You think it's going to work? No. Not only that, it's going to be really hard to do, and probably very painful. There are standards to help us do this. You do have to select the right standards. In some cases, the right standards have been selected for you, depending on your industry or business. NIST 853, that's a government-focused standard that has been expanded to many businesses because it's all-encompassing. So you do have to be careful to select the right controls. There's ISO 27000, right, which is more of an international standard. So if my business does a lot of international business, I'm probably going to levitate toward that. And then doing risk management. So these are control. The risk management piece, there are standards for that as well. Both NIST and ISO have good standards. This is how simple this should end up being. Yes, callers. green, yellowish, whatever that is, and red. High, medium, low. Risk is the easiest thing ever. It's just a calculation. It's probability times impact. If I can do it. The hard part is agreeing on what the actual probability and impact is, and to do that, we need someone to help us. Thank you, NIST. Thank you, ISO. Also, this. I will caution everybody, similar to the curse of knowledge. Has anyone ever heard there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here? Let's just get that out of the way. Get in the Shark Tank now, because that is a bad idea. Why? You could spend all of your time and money on low-hanging fruit, which could be number 999 on the risk scoring table. Was that a good use of your time? Nope. You still have 998 higher level risks that you didn't do anything with. But someone else did it. I've done this before. There's this new technology, yada, yada, yada. Guess what? That's how you get in trouble. Using risk management helps you avoid this concept. In fact, telling people that you understand that, especially in the business, will help you a lot. The whole point is to prioritize the most important things. I don't care if it's low-hanging fruit or not. Now, in some cases, there's low-hanging fruit that is also important. Awesome. Let's do it. Just don't say low-hanging fruit. Another thing that's really important. It's starting to get complex now, and I apologize. But for me, this is good because everyone in this room has a little bit of a different perspective about what this risk thing is in relation to what I do. Do I focus on technology? Do I focus on business process? Or do I focus on the strategy at the organization? Those are three known categories that apply to risk management, and we talk about those in different ways. So whether I'm doing a pen test and I've produced a list of 12 really critical gaps in a specific asset or technology, or whether I go into a business and assess their governance process and say, this is pretty bad, I can apply risk management to that and communicate back to the business at the right level using this process. So we think about it as strategic, business, or system or application risk. And it's really important to keep that straight in your mind too, so that as you're communicating with people, they know what level in the organization you're coming in at. Okay, so this is not my keyword, but you're not in control. This is the key. And this is another key point of risk management is it makes it a business process. No one person is making the decision for the rest of the people or trying to force their view on somebody. The business decides what those risks are. Now, if you do it wrong, you're basically saying, this is what we need to do, trust me, I know what I'm doing, let's buy this stuff, or let's do this. If we do it right, it is the business as a whole will agree on what those top items are. All right, step one of risk management is risk assessment. Let's jump into this. There's 9 distinct steps. There's 9 things we're actually going to think about doing and help keep us organized. And it is used to determine potential threats. Remember, what did I say? Interaction with uncertainty. What are those potential threats? And what their risk level is. And the output of that is to use to identify appropriate controls. Now, when you tell me there's a huge risk, I'm going to immediately say, well, what do we have to do to fix it? That's that step, right? What are our options? Because there's going to be more than one, most likely. And then the output of this is intended for the business. Step one, we need to agree on what the scope is. If you're talking about all the technical assets, and I'm talking about all of our physical locations and the processes we use to secure access, we're not on the same page. If we want to talk about just one location or one part of the business, we have to agree on that. Whatever it is it the hardware, the software? Is it who we partner with? Is it the people or not the people? What's our mission? And what data do we have? And I'm going to jump right into that, because honestly, nobody would be here right now if there wasn't data. This is what drives everything we do in cybersecurity. No data? Go home, right? So to do a really good risk assessment, you have to know what your assets are. And in our world, the asset is data. And if we don't have some sort of simple inventory to understand what assets we have, data assets, and who owns them, then we have a problem here. Because I can't effectively talk about risk at that point. Couple examples. Does anyone think that IT owns all the data, all the assets? IT owns 0 data. Some people that might surprise. The data, IT exists as a service provider to the business owns the data, specifically in the form of business units like finance, they own data. Human resources, they own data. Sales and business development, right, client lists. What about research and development? What about product development? They all own the data. IT just moves it around. Custodians versus owners are two very different things, and when I want to talk about risk, I have to understand where that data is and who owns it, so that I can talk about what the impacts of all these gaps that we find out are. You need inventory. Step two, now that I think about what I'm going to look at and what the data is that's involved, now I need to identify the threats to the organization based on a number of things. Things like past security violations. That's a good way to understand what might happen. It already happened. Things that happen in the industry. Bring in some people that have seen this before. Ask them what happens. The media, right? The news, media, we learn a lot from what's happened elsewhere. And then once we've put all of those things together as determining what are our threats, then we need to classify them. And there's really three main buckets. It's natural, fire, flood, earthquake. It's environmental, cooling system failed. Or it's human. Right? A lot of our threats are human, of course. And by the way, does it have to be malicious? No. Right? I accidentally deleted the Active Directory. My availability is 0. That has happened before. I didn't do it, but someone else did, right? There were good intentions, but they didn't really do good risk management. So we have, does anyone still believe that users are the weakest link? I have issue with that. We can talk about that later. If you want to fight later, come see me. But users, right? Certainly our workforce introduces risk, and we are responsible for that. So step 3, now that I've thought about what the threats are, now I can talk about what are the vulnerabilities. So I can give you some examples here, but we do this in a lot of ways. Vulnerability scanning and penetration testing absolutely tells me about vulnerabilities. But what? On an asset, an application, or a system. What about vulnerabilities in my people? Well, I do a social engineering test. That's going to tell me about vulnerabilities in my people. Or what about vulnerabilities in my business process? You know what? We don't really give a crap who gets domain admin. That's a big problem. That has nothing to do with my assets or technology. That has to do with my process. From there, once I know what all those gaps are, whether they're human or physical or environmental, and whether they apply to my technology or my business process or my people, what are the exploits? So I'm going to use an analogy about a house here to wrap this all up later. But if I come to the opinion that a very important control for a house is to have a roof, and there's a hole in the roof, what are the threats? Rain is a threat at that point, right? What about small animals? Is that a threat? Sure. What if it's big enough for a bear to come in? That's a threat. What if I live somewhere cold or warm or in the rainforest? I have all these different threats. I have a hole. Now I have all these things I have to talk about. And I guarantee you it's a lot of work. The more gaps you have, of course, the more problems there are. So we use some simple things like this chart to help us through. Keep our thoughts organized. What are the threats? Terminated employees are a threat, right? You gave them all domain admin. You didn't remove it when they left. So now what? Fire, unauthorized users. That happens a lot too. And then what's the vulnerability? Well, in fire, our fire suppression controls are not operable, right? And what's the exploit? Well, they're either they fail, or maybe, does anyone have the red button to shut off power in case of emergency? Has anyone seen those in a bad spot? That is an example of a threat. And then what happens? The impact, data center off. Now I can talk about, what's a reasonable way to fix that? Some of these are a lot easier than others, as you can see. Some of them are really hard. So now we look at the controls. So after we've come up with this list of problems and what can be used to exploit them, now I'm going to say, well, what controls do you have? You're going to be like, Dan, we have a tarp on the roof. We're good. Okay. Yeah, from rain maybe. How durable is that tarp? What if there's a hailstorm, right? Or snow or ice, or the bear? Maybe it works in some cases, but not all. Somebody has a plastic cover on the red button for the data center. That helps, for sure. Those are examples of controls that help to what? Control our risk. So what we need to do is talk about both technical controls and non-technical controls. And I think I've alluded to these already. Access control process itself, absolutely not technical. I authorize, someone's manager, I might authorize what they can get access to. Maybe we have a standard set of access for roles, but then unique requests have to be approved individually. That's a non-technical control. What about background checks for new employees? Crazy. Technical controls, firewalls, antivirus, endpoint protection, all this stuff. So we think about these as preventative controls or protective controls, and we think about what controls are corrective. And that helps us to put this all in perspective, so as we move to the next steps, we don't argue, right? We've already agreed. We put them in a spreadsheet, and they're really clear. Is this an effective control? Right? Somebody thought it was. Let's put up this gate. What about this? No, that's stupid. But we do this stuff every day in more complex ways. We all laugh about this, but I can laugh the same about other stuff we hear about, right? So step 5, how likely is this to happen? Are there bears where I live? No. Great. Why do we talk about that, Dan? Well, done, right? But if I live in the desert, it's going to get really hot. If I live in the rainforest, it's going to get a lot of rain. So as I move through this process, now that I've identified what could happen, now all I really care about is how likely is it to happen. We're getting to that easy calculation. And then we put in a chart, give ourselves some good guidance that we can all go back to when we start to argue. High, medium, low, we all get that. I'd like to touch base on these quick. High. Threat source is highly motivated, hungry, angry bear, and sufficiently capable, and controls to prevent the vulnerability from exercise are ineffective. I agree that's a good definition of a high likelihood of that happening. I'm really hungry, that tarp is not going to keep me out. And then we go down, and we use equally useful definitions to keep us all on the same page. Great. I said there were 9 steps, right? So moving on to how I actually determine the risk. So I've done the initial analysis. I feel pretty good that we're all on the same page. How likely are all these things to happen? And it's unique to me. Every business is different. This is the problem. You can't just do this for every business in the world. Why? People, process, and technology are all different in every business, even if you're direct competitors. So step 6, determine the adverse impact of a vulnerability. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The impact is a loss of this. That's all we talk about is, I lose confidentiality, I lose integrity, I lose availability. Now, when I think about this as the impact, well, let's use some real examples. Ransomware. What's the impact of that? What do you guys say? It depends. Do you have a way to recover your assets quickly or not? Did the ransomware also encrypt your online backups, which were really awesome when you bought them because they're fast, you don't need tapes anymore, but now it's encrypted, you don't have tapes anymore. So that could be pretty impactful. Or we can go to the bear. What happens if a bear is in your house? Not good, right? So impact is now what we're focused on. And one thing that I don't like the term pro tip, but one thing that I tell people to do is once you got through those first 5 steps, and everyone talked about likelihood, agreed on the vulnerability threat pairs, forget about it. All I want to know now is what is the impact of that? Because what people start to do is they start to solve the problem, and then you just blew up the risk management process. Do not try to solve the problem. Just tell me, very simply, what is the impact if the bear gets in? And again, we simply use high, medium, or low to tell us what the impact is. But in this case, instead of saying it's a highly motivated, intelligent attacker, and we don't have any good controls to prevent them, high means that if that vulnerability is exploited, the result is a very high cost or loss of tangible assets or resources to the business. It may significantly violate, harm, or impede the organization's mission, reputation, or interest, and it may result in human death or serious injury. So high is pretty bad. And that's pretty clear. Basically, the business may go away, or people may die. As opposed to low, if this happens, there's some loss of tangible assets, and it may noticeably affect the organization's mission, reputation, or interest, but you carry on. Not going to be a showstopper. A bruise versus a broken neck, right? That's it. You just did risk management. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take each of those, the likelihood and the impact, and consider the controls that you have in place so that we understand how to reduce the risk and just multiply them. So when I do that, I come up with that chart I showed you earlier, and I can talk to the business in very clear terms. Now, we talked about impact, we talked about likelihood, we classified those. That was just to get us to this risk rating, right? And pretend you had a 1 through 10 score. You know, low is maybe, 1 through 3, and then medium somewhere in the middle, and high is 7 through 10. If I was to multiply a 10 for impact times a 10 for likelihood, that comes out to 100. If I multiply a 1 and a 1, that's a 2. I can very quickly sort those from largest to smallest, and then I go to the business and say, hey, based on our risk management process and the definitions that you helped us come up with as to what high risk is, we have 4 of these. There's a strong need for corrective measures. An existing system may continue to operate, but a corrective action plan must be put in place as soon as possible. The business told you, if we have a high, this is what we need to do. Down the list. And that's what this helps us with, probability times impact. So we end up with this nice clean matrix. We can sort risks top to bottom. One of the things that I do is I promise any business that I do a risk assessment with, I'll give you a top 10, period. Not 300, not 500. Certainly there are that many gaps in their controls, but you get a top 10 risks. And by the way, I don't tell you what they are. I just help you do this risk management thing. You tell us what they are. So control recommendations. Now that I got the picture and I know there's top 3 or 4 high risks and some moderate risks, now we can start to talk about what's the right amount of time, money, and effort to spend on remediation. And I don't waste time, money, or effort because we're all on the same page. I can do things like cost-benefit analysis. I can talk about the feasibility. I can look at if I have specific minimum levels dictated to me by law through legislation or regulation, or what else? Business partner contracts, that's a legal agreement. Certainly that's part of the mix. And then I talk about these in form of maybe, what is our policy? Does our policy need to change? Is that all we need to do? So yesterday we didn't require an incident response plan, now we do. The board agrees. Yes, we need that, it's clear. So the policy says we'll have one. It'll say who owns it, and that person will go do it. Of course, it's not always that easy. So, moving on to step 9, now you can document stuff. It's already done for you in most cases. You talked about all the problems. You talked about how likely they are to impact, how likely they are, what the impact would be. You've sorted them from top to bottom based on risk. And you've made recommendations around, should we change our policy? Should we change our procedures? Should we do something with our personnel? Maybe we need more people, or maybe we need to train our people. Should we adjust our facilities? Should we move that red button somewhere else? Should we change our technology? And maybe, should we get more insurance? So if you think about risk management, it's all about accepting risk or coming up with a way to make that risk acceptable. In some cases, you can't do any of these top line issues, and the business may decide it's worth a certain amount of money to them to go to their insurance company and say, look, we've identified this risk in our business, we cannot solve this now. Will you write? Will you give us a rider for our existing policy to help us if this happens? They're an insurance company, so yes, they absolutely will. And that'll cost a certain amount of dollars. The business will say, okay, is this worth $5? Or is this worth $5 million to us? The business will decide. I'm not going to decide for them. All right, so recap. What are we talking about? What are the boundaries? What's the scope? What are the vulnerabilities? What are the threats? I don't really care about threats if there's no vulnerability. What existing controls do we have? What's the likelihood of that occurring? What's the impact if it does occur? Multiply those two together and you get a risk. Sort those top to bottom. Top risk come to the top. Everyone knows what risk means in the business because they defined it for you. You can talk about reasonable controls. Those will cost money or take effort. I can quantify that pretty easily. And I document the findings in the next report so I'm compliant. Everyone can read it anytime and say, wow, you guys did an awesome job. That's it. No, just kidding. There's a couple more things. Let me ask you a question. So, hole in our roof. Your house has a hole in the roof. What do you do? Yes?
Stick your finger in the hole.
Stick your finger in the hole, so you're going to mitigate that issue. Anyone else? No, seriously, what is your immediate response? Fix it. Does anyone disagree? Disagree, hands up. All right, there's only 2 people that are right. You don't fix it. Why? Because if your house looks like this, who gives a crap about the roof? There's a tree in your living room. There's no windows, no electricity, no heat, and quite honestly, probably would not work. This is our problem. We see an issue, and we immediately say, how do I fix it? And what do? You actually start to fix it. You just spent $20,000 on a roof. You just threw that money away. In fact, you made people feel safe, which is even worse, and avoided the real issue. Risk management is designed to avoid this. So as people, we are super bad at that. Trust me. And there's many examples. Read some books by Bruce Schneier. He's awesome at explaining the psychology that affects us in this technical age. So, real quick, what is risk mitigation? So I told you I was going to tell you about risk management. There's a couple pieces to this. It's the assessment, right? Now, how do we mitigate? Well, luckily, NIST defined that for me again. Love those acronyms. Prioritizing, evaluating, and implementing the appropriate risk-reducing controls recommended from the risk assessment process. That's actually not too hard to understand, but the translation is how much time and money should we, the business, spend to be reasonably secure? That is the translation. That is what risk management gives you. Does anyone know who Captain Whiskey is? Yes, there's a jet engine on the roof of his car. And he will actually be out of the car while the jet engine is going, and the car is on 2 wheels riding the car, right, with the jet engine going. So, is that a reasonable risk versus reward?
How much does it pay?
Right? What's it worth? Obviously, the Captain Risky, 100%. I encourage you to look this guy up. He is insane. So, but I guarantee you, he did some risk assessment and came up with, he's got a helmet on, that's good, right? But it's this easy. This is funny, but it's true. This is what we're doing. There is a jet engine coming at you in the form of a cybersecurity threat, and you are in that car, right? What do? Do we want a helmet? Do you want a fireproof suit? Do you want a roll cage in the car? We probably want lots of things. So let's go through this quick. This is a little easier, but there's a few things that I think are really, really, really important. This is not a technical function at all. Has anyone got that? Not got that by now? This is just about making the business aware, allowing them to decide, and then giving them visibility to the process. So prioritizing our actions. So those controls that we decided to put in place based on what we learned need to happen. So what's the order? Who's first? Well, I'm probably going to try to do the controls for the top risk items first. But interesting story, it doesn't always work that way. So we might not have the right resources, we might not have the money right now. So we do have to go through and prioritize our remediation. The other thing is, it's not a straight line. There's some parallel functionality going on here. Facilities is fixing the red button. Can the technical people fix the availability issue with ransomware and backups? Sure, we can do it at the same time. Step 2, we evaluate those recommended control options. So now it's time to actually do it, right? We've been given some options for controls. Now let's, put the rubber to the pavement and go here. Make sure they're reasonable. Make sure we get all the details nailed down, and then have the people that know that make that decision and address all those details. Step 3, what's the cost? And is it feasible? I go back to this. Yep, we did all our homework. We got the recommendations from the risk assessment group. Now, the technical team came back and said, yeah, this makes sense. Here's all the details we need to worry about. Here's some compatibility issues. Here's the total cost of all the modules and all the other things I need. Give that to the business. Say, is it worth it? There'll be, a lot of times, there's other benefits to consider too. Like, hey, by the way, if we do this, it also solves these problems. So, finally, select those controls. Step 5, critical. Somebody owns it. It's not a spreadsheet that says, we're going to implement this. It's a person, a singular person owns that remediation item. They're the owner, and they will have help, and they'll coordinate, but it needs to be owned. It's actually a requirement. They need to have the right knowledge and expertise to do it. And then develop the implementation plan. So document the plan for actually implementing those controls, Think about what resources, priorities, and schedules need to be put in place. And hey, this guy or girl, go, do this, own it, make it happen. By the way, these reports usually go to the board or equivalent. They want to see what the progress is, what the estimated timeline is. And the next quarter, when they meet again, they say, where are we at? Are we on track? Are we not on track? And if we're not on track, why not? And then implement the controls. So certainly this piece sounds easier. But if you don't have an owner, and you don't have support at the highest level, what happens? Probably doesn't get done. Because you're working in a vacuum or silo, that's a bad thing. The other really nice thing about risk management done right is the business will tell you what it wants and will support you in that process. It's not me over here with a megaphone saying, you have to do this, and they don't hear me. So let me give you a little cheat sheet here. By the way, we're going to have a copy of this presentation. There's 4 things you should ask when evaluating controls. First of all, if control would reduce risk more than needed, which happens a lot, hey, we have this wireless vulnerability. Yes, let's rip out all of our wireless infrastructure, 802.1x, new Active Directory, blah, 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 blah. See whether a less expensive alternative exists. This is about cost and risk, right? If control would cost more than the risk reduction provided, so you recommended something that is greater than the total revenue for the business in a year, find something else. If control does not reduce risk sufficiently, then look for more controls or different controls. So there may be a suite of things to solve that problem. Or maybe there's another option. Go talk to people you know, get some opinions. And if the control provides enough risk reduction and is cost effective, then use it. If all else fails, ask what would Captain Risky do, right? That's So wrapping up here, some insights for me and the people I work with. This may not be 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. The top 10 risks that we often find when doing a risk assessment. Number 1, you do not have any governance. The board doesn't give a crap about your top 10 cybersecurity risks. They don't even know what that means, and you haven't helped them do it. If I don't know how to interpret risk at the highest level of the business and make decisions, do you think I have risk or too much risk? Absolutely. We need people that own risk in each of their areas. And if I'm a data owner, human resources, finance, R&D, development, so on and so forth, I own the risk whether I know it or not. I just may not be making smart decisions about it because we didn't use this sort of process. And no one told me I own it. I don't even know what data I own because, quite honestly, I think IT owns all the data. 2, policy, procedures, and controls. You know, in a perfect world, a thorough information security policy is no more than 10 pages. Why? Because all it is the direction that the business wishes to take. And a good way to know if your policy is any good or not is have the board read it. If they can't get through it and understand it, it's no good. All the other things behind that, like your control standards, which are derived from the direction, yeah, you got hundreds of pages of that stuff, and a subsection of those are owned by who? HR, finance, technology, so on and so forth. And then the procedures that support those standards may be even more in depth. Most businesses don't do that properly. Therefore, they can't really set direction, and they can't really measure where they're at in their desire to have good controls. Data classification, so and defining what my assets, my data assets are, most businesses don't have any idea how many records they have in each department and what their value to the business is from a CIA perspective, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If you don't have that, don't expect to be able to do any sort of effective risk management or manage security as a whole. Access control, terrible, right? Not generally owned by the people that should own it. Now, I'm not saying that the director of HR should be going in and making group policy changes and group associations and all these things, but I am saying that they should approve all that access, and especially exceptions to their standards. Why? Because they own the risk. They own the data. And any access given that isn't in line with their risk appetite isn't up to me. It's also a major reason why organizations get hacked all the time. Too much access. Either advertently or inadvertently. Incident response. We do not have a plan. We don't test the plan. That's IT's job. Vendor risk management. You've shared all your data with a vendor. You have no idea what they do for security. Pretty bad idea. You're putting stuff in the cloud. You're letting people connect to you, whatever it is. Whatever you define as your direction, your policies and your standards, if your data goes somewhere else, all those same things apply. How do you ensure that those third parties are doing it? Some research reports said up to 2/3 of breaches in some couple of years ago were because of vendors. Why? Because I feel really good when I partner with a vendor and they say, yeah, we got a security program. Great, check. Awareness and training, right? Workforce, not just end users. So let's be careful here. Everybody in the organization has a security role. I don't know why I'm picking on the director of HR today, but I am. The director of HR has a security role. Do they know that they are responsible for approving all access to their assets? And do they know how to do that? Have they been trained on that? Does the development team know how to integrate security into the SDLC? Have they been trained on it? Do the physical security guards know how to report physical security incidents? Do the end users and employees know how to report physical security incidents? And it just goes on and on and on, right? Secure configuration baselines. So this is the first technical issue we've seen, right? This is actually technology focused. Not having a standard for how my firewalls and wireless and servers and policies should be configured means that, what? I do best effort. When we set it up, it was good. 3 years later, is it still good? I don't know. I don't have a baseline to compare against. Dan's pretty good at this stuff, so I feel good. Do people go in these systems and change settings every day? Yes. And how do you know that it's still in line with what you decided was a reasonable set of controls? So I can think back to a really simple example. A college has a reportable incident that, I'll make it fast, boils way back to somebody unchecking one box in their spam filter. That's it. Someone turned off the rules that blocked bad file types. Previous to that, everyone decided, yep, here's our list of the files we're going to block in general, go. Wasn't in a baseline, it was never checked. Somewhere, somehow, someone turned it off. Never turned it back on. Logging monitoring or security event management, huge problem. It's almost the same issue. If I don't define what I need to do and who's responsible for the different pieces of that, how do I actually know I'm doing it? And then vulnerability management, right? Everyone has a vulnerability management and patching solution, but if we go in and assess its efficacy, we see that there are things missed because I have to configure it in the right way. It has to be able to integrate with all of my systems, have the right permissions. How do I know it's working? Usually it's not, or partially. So to make it really simple, those issues can be put into 3 categories. Business process, people, or technology. And this is a summary of, I think, all the risk assessments that Greg Castle did last year. The majority of the problems were in the business around cybersecurity, period. The next biggest group was in the people. No one knew their security role. No one knew the difference between a data owner and a custodian. You knew it. And then technology is big. Why? Because we've been thinking about cybersecurity as a technology problem for how long? Very long time. And quite honestly, we've got the technology we need, but we don't have the processes we need to support it. Critical success factors. Yes, don't buy an umbrella and hope that it rains. But don't buy an umbrella and expect it to work in a hurricane. Right? That's exactly what we're talking about here. Let's understand our risks. And by the way, don't hope at all. No. Have it defined, have the business make those decisions for you. Really important, I'm going to come back to this. Own it. If all of the steps that I've just spelled out are not clearly owned by somebody, this will fail. It'll be like all the other stuff we try to do, that we end up with some list of stuff that's in some spreadsheet on the drive, and we did it, we felt good about it, we didn't do anything with it. You need to have an owner for risk management, then you need to have an owner for the remediation. It needs to be visible, and it should absolutely go to the board or equivalent level for approval and tracking. That means it's important to business. Sounds simple, but a lot of organizations still don't get it. You're either building a defensible position or you're not, for your business or for yourself. So ask yourself, are you compliant or secure? And how compliant or secure do you want to be? Will your process stand up to scrutiny? You had a problem. Auditors are there. did you do the right stuff? Because quite honestly, if you did the right things, you're still gonna have problems. Hopefully they'll be less, but they're still gonna occur. So are you gonna be the 3 out of 4 from the HIPAA review that didn't do it right, or are you gonna be the one that did? And of course, if you need help, get help. That's really an important message because this process sometimes is really difficult to implement. Why? We're literally bringing the whole business together to do this. So we need people invested from all of the business units to make that successful. And that is it. If anyone has any questions, happy to answer them. So, sharks or vending machines? Yes.
As you mentioned, people need to own it. In my observation, just my personal observation, whenever you walk into an enterprise, sometimes, even with senior management support,
Yep.
you try to assign ownership, and it's about, I've described it as trying to make my children stop playing video games,
Mm-hmm.
right? They just resist continuously. I wonder if you encountered that and any successes that you had in addressing that.
So let me rephrase the question. Find it very difficult to get ownership around this process and the remediation, and what tips do I have in helping to get the business to not only recognize, but support those owners?
I think the question is more along the lines of the individual people
Oh.
resist it.
Yeah, okay. So individual people resist it. That's a problem with security rules, quite honestly, and job descriptions and expectations. So if you hired me to be the director of HR, nowhere in there did it say you will own the HR data and participate in the risk management process and ensure that all of the HR-related gaps and remediation items are effectively managed or not. That's where it starts. So, and you will find that gap almost everywhere. If the risk assessment includes the right stakeholders, that is the most effective way to get past that hurdle, which is no one really knew what their role was. So there's really 3 objectives in a risk assessment for me. One is what you guys would already expect. Identify gaps against known standards for controls. Right? 2, another one that you would expect. Prioritize those based on risk. But there's a third one, which is create awareness about the process and the priorities and the ownership of these gaps. So if the process is done in a way that includes the right people, both in the assessment part and then in the risk workshop piece, you will help solve many of those problems. Ultimately, you need people to be pretty vocal and supportive of the process so that it goes to the most senior resources in that company, whether it's the board or the CEO or whomever that might be, or else that lack of understanding of responsibility leads to what you discussed, which is inaction. Yes, another question.
Let me throw this out there in a nutshell. My group did a type of vulnerability assessment of an entity, of a group. And we immediately saw things like, the virtual center logging out on the internet, or Oracle applications that are out on the internet, these kind of things. Just bad stuff.
Yep.
Talked to their CISO. He was a smart guy. He had just had a sort of audit assessment done by another group. And he said, well, I came to the conclusion, or what they told me and what I took away from this is our biggest problem is lack of policies. So that makes sense in a certain way, but to me, he had more immediate issues. So while